Welcome to the unsettling side of childhood, where the familiar turns sinister and innocent curiosity leads to chilling encounters. When I was 10 years old, my family moved to a small rural town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and kids were allowed to run free until the streetlights flickered on. Behind our house was a thick patch of woods that stretched for miles, and my parents often warned me not to go too far. But as a curious kid, I was always drawn to the places I was told to avoid. One afternoon, I decided to explore deeper into the woods than I had ever gone before. I told myself it was just another adventure, but there was something about the dense trees and the silence that made me uneasy. I wandered for what felt like hours, the trees growing thicker and the sunlight dimming. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing with an old abandoned shack in the middle. It looked like it had been there for decades, the wood rotting and the roof sagging. I knew I shouldn't go inside, but curiosity got the better of me. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty woods. The inside was dark, with only a few shafts of light breaking through the cracks in the walls. The air was musty, thick with dust and decay. As I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. There were old, worn-out toys scattered around the floor. Dolls with missing limbs, toy cars covered in dirt, and a tattered teddy bear lying in the corner. It was as if someone had once used this place as a playhouse, but had long since abandoned it. As I moved further in, I felt a sudden chill, like someone was watching me. I turned around quickly, but the shack was empty. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned to face the back of the shack. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a man. He was sitting in the corner, his knees drawn up to his chest. His clothes were dirty and torn, and his face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in days. But it was his eyes. Those eyes made my heart stop with dread. They were cold and empty. He watched me without saying a word, just staring with a look that sent a wave of terror through my entire body. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear, until he finally spoke in a low, raspy voice, telling me to leave and never come back. Without thinking, I bolted out of the shack and ran as fast as I could back through the woods. I didn't stop running until I burst through the back door of my house, gasping for air. I never told anyone what happened. How could I even try to explain the fear when I encountered that terrifying man? After that day, I avoided the woods entirely. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and wonder who he was and what he was doing out there in that shack. A few years later, the local news reported that the remains of a missing person were found in those woods. They said he'd been dead for years, maybe even decades. The person who did it is still a mystery. I was about 15, the age where you feel invincible. My mom, a single parent, was my world. But I liked the freedom that came when she had to step out for errands. It made me feel like the man of the house, in charge and capable. So, when she told me she was heading to the store and would be back in 20 minutes, I didn't think twice. I waved her off, already planning how I'd spend my short stint of independence. The house was quiet, just the way I liked it. I sprawled out on the couch, flipping through channels, not really paying attention to anything in particular. But then, a strange noise caught my ear. It was subtle at first, like a soft scrape against the outside wall. I muted the TV, straining to listen. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence, and I almost brushed it off as my imagination. Then it happened again, louder this time. My heart started to beat a little faster, but I told myself it was probably just a branch brushing against the house. We lived in a rural area, surrounded by trees. It wasn't unusual for the wind to play tricks, but there was no wind that night. I stood up, my legs feeling a bit shaky. The sound had come from the side of the house, near the kitchen window. I moved towards it slowly, trying to convince myself that I wasn't scared. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I reached the window, careful not to make a sound, and peered out through the small gap between the curtains. And what I saw nearly gave me a heart attack. He was crouched low, his face partially obscured by the curtains on the window. He was so close I could see the reflection of the kitchen light in his eyes. He hadn't seen me yet, but he was looking, searching for a way in. Panic set in. I backed away from the window, careful to keep my movements slow and quiet. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, drowning out everything else. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling so much I nearly dropped it. I whispered to the operator, telling them about the man outside, and they assured me that help was on the way. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, my eyes locked on the window, expecting him to burst in at any moment. The man stood up slowly, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might try the door. But then, he glanced around, as if sensing that his time was up, and walked back into the darkness. I stayed on the line until I saw the flashing lights of the police car pull up in front of the house. By the time they searched the area, the man was long gone. They found footprints in the dirt outside the window, but nothing else. No clues as to who he was or what he wanted. My mom came home to find me still shaken, but safe. I never felt truly safe in that house again, always jumping at the slightest noise. I had wanted to be the man of the house, but that experience showed me how vulnerable I really was. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked out that window, if I had been caught off guard. But I'm glad I never had to find out. When I was 10, the summer carnival came to town, bringing a burst of excitement to our quiet suburban community. My best friend Chris and I had been saving our allowance for weeks, planning to spend every last penny on rides, games, and sugary treats. The carnival was the highlight of our summer, a time to escape the boredom of small-town life and immerse ourselves in the flashing lights and noisy crowds. We arrived early, eager to soak up every minute of the experience. Spinning rides, sticky cotton candy, and the thrill of winning cheap prizes at the game booths. After sunset, the carnival transformed into a dazzling display of lights, along with loud screams and laughter. By the time we rode the Ferris wheel, the night was alive with energy. From the top, we could see the entire carnival, the distant lights of the town, and the vast darkness of the surrounding woods. The Ferris wheel paused at the peak, and Chris leaned out, trying to see as far as he could. The view from up there was incredible, and I could sense his excitement. When the ride ended, we climbed out, ready to head home. But as we walked away, Chris spotted something unusual. A shadowy figure slipped behind a booth, heading toward a dark, secluded area where the carnival workers kept their trailers and equipment. It was a place we'd been warned to avoid, but Chris's curiosity got the better of him. He was determined to check it out, already moving toward the roped-off area. I hesitated, glancing back at the bright lights and noisy crowds, but Chris was already ducking under the rope. Reluctantly, I followed him. The area behind the booths was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the lively carnival. Chris moved ahead, carefully navigating between the trailers. My unease grew with every step. As we approached the far end of the lot, Chris suddenly froze. He had spotted something, or someone, up ahead. I strained to see what had caught his attention, but all I could make out were shadows moving in the dim light. I urged Chris to go back, but he ignored me, creeping closer to the edge of the trailers. I followed cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. What we saw next sent a cold wave of fear through me. In the shadows, a group of men were huddled together, their voices low and urgent. On the ground next to them were several crates, partially covered by tarps. One of the men pried open a crate, revealing stacks of cash and what looked like bags of something illicit. My blood ran cold as I realized we were witnessing something we shouldn't have. Chris and I exchanged a panicked glance. He signaled that we needed to get out of there. Before we could move, one of the men looked up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted us. The man shouted at us to stop, his voice sharp and menacing. Chris and I bolted, sprinting back toward the carnival as fast as our legs could carry us. I could hear footsteps running behind us. We didn't stop until we were back in the bright, noisy crowd, gasping for breath. The men had stopped chasing us, probably not wanting to draw attention to themselves. As we glanced back one last time, one of the men made a chilling gesture, forming a gun with his index finger and thumb. He aimed it directly at us, pretending to pull the trigger before slipping into the darkness with the others. We were terrified, and the memory of that moment haunted us long after the night was over. We hurried home without saying a word, both of us too shaken to speak. When we finally reached my house, Chris turned to me, his face pale. He insisted that we couldn't tell anyone about what we had seen. If we did, those men might come after us. I nodded, though my mind was racing. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake, replaying the events over and over. I knew we had stumbled into something dangerous, something that could have ended very badly for us. A few days later, Chris's family packed up and moved out of town. His parents told mine that it was because of a job opportunity in another state, but I knew the truth. Chris had seen something he shouldn't have, and his family was getting as far away as possible. I never spoke of that night to anyone. The carnival came back the next year, but I stayed far away. I never again looked at those bright flashing lights with the same innocent excitement. The carnival had lost its magic for me, replaced by the chilling memory of what we saw, and what might have happened if we hadn't gotten away in time.